What are lambdas? Okay. What are lambdas from a mathematical, theoretical point of view, or from a Java 8, I'd like to use it point of view? In the past, when we've done Java programming, we have been happy to use anonymous inner classes. I use the word happy loosely, right? But if you're going to attach, say, you have a listener and you give it, it wants to listen to action events, you'll do that using an anonymous inner class. So you'll give it a chunk of code, which I can't point to really easily, but you'll give it a chunk of code which happens to have, it actually implements some sort of interface or abstract class, and it's a full-blown class, and then you have to implement a method, and you've got like 5 lines of code, when all you really want to do is say, look, when you need me, I want you to call this thing here, okay? And we did that with anonymous inner classes. So Java has had closures since the beginning. So anyone who tells you that Java 8 only just got closures is not technically correct. Java 8 only just got nice syntax for closures and good performance for them.
I'm sorry, but what were closures before?
Anonymous inner classes. So this, where you say new supplier, and then you give it the implementation of your implementation of supplier. But we didn't do this a lot in enterprise Java code because it's clumsy and it's big and there's a lot of boilerplate.
Closures should be on the method level, not on the class level.
Yes, but we did it in Java. We did this by having anonymous inner classes. So we defined behavior for a method, but you had to wrap it in a whole class. That's how we did it in Java previously. It wasn't elegant, which is why people didn't like it. But effectively, that's what we had. This is how you wrap up a small piece of behavior and pass it around as a whole-blown object. Now with closures, from the syntax point of view, we'll see more complex closures, but this is lambdas, but this is quite a nice simple one. These are the parameters we pass in. Let's go back to what the method looks like. The method returns a string. It's called get, but it doesn't really matter, and it takes 0 parameters. Okay, so supplier, let's have a look at supplier. Supplier is a functional interface, and you tell it what type it's going to return, and it takes no parameters. It's a really simple interface, has a single method, and so you implement that to get a single method. Single abstract method is what they call this. So if you're doing this pre-Java 8, you say new supplier. Supplier is an interface, not a class, not an abstract class. You say new supplier, and then you provide the implementation for the get method. And the get method, like I say, takes no parameters and returns a string, because we defined supplier as returning a type of string. But the stub service, basically, what's interesting here is it takes a string path, an int port, and a supplier. But we'll get into these details more later.
So can I just ask, is the fact that the method called get significant here?
No, doesn't matter at all.
Doesn't need to be apply, it can just be, and why is that?
What's important for lambdas is that the thing that you're going to implement or extend has to have a single abstract method. In this particular case, it has to be an interface with a single, not implemented method on it. Now that might sound weird because from an interface point of view, pre-Java 8, interfaces, all of their methods were unimplemented, right? They're all abstract methods. In Java 8, you can have default methods. So you can provide an implementation on an interface. We're not going to cover that bit, okay? We're just going to cover the basics here. But if we looked at, let's say, let's look at list. Have we got any default methods on here? Right. This is an interface. This is the list interface, the one we've been using since forever. In order to add new functionality to an existing interface and not break backwards compatibility, Java 8 provides default methods. So you can provide a default implementation of a method on interfaces. And this means that anything that previously implemented list and anything which is going to implement list in future gets this new method. See, it says since Java 8, 1.8, gets this new method, replace all. And this is the default implementation of that method. You can override it with your own implementation if you want. Are lambdas a move into the functional programming paradigm for Java? Yes, they are a step in that general direction. I don't believe the idea is to turn Java into a functional language. But object-oriented always allowed you to pass messages between objects. And that's basically what we're doing here. We're passing a bit of behavior between objects. So I think at the moment that's the goal of providing these lambdas. I was halfway through answering the question of what is a lambda. I didn't quite finish that, right? So let's have a quick look. I don't want to go into too much detail about default methods because I think that they can get, they can sidetrack you from thinking about stuff which is actually useful to you on a day-to-day basis. Default methods have been provided by the language. They might be useful for you if you are writing a library. As a Java developer who is working in trying to implement the code that just does what you want it to do, I don't think default methods will be that applicable to you on a day-to-day basis. There's a bunch of stuff about it on various other talks and presentations too, so you can find out about that fairly easily. So our supplier interface has a single method, and that's what makes it a functional interface. It's just got a single abstract method, okay? So what I've done is I provide the implementation of this method. It doesn't matter what it's called. It could be called do something. It could be called blah. And we'll have a go at writing some of these ourselves in the future. So we provide the implementation of it. And then, so this is, everyone's sort of fairly okay with what the abstract class is doing, right? We're returning the string value and not taking any parameters. When we turn that into Java 8 syntax, remember that the method doesn't take any parameters, so we don't pass any parameters in on this side of the arrow, okay? It's just empty. And on this side, we need to tell it what to return. We could, if we wanted to, do this a bit more longhand. We could say this. So we have our curly braces, which says this is the behavior that makes up the method. And what I want you to do is I want you to return this value. But Java 8 says, well, actually, I don't need you to put the return keyword in this particular case because it's pretty obvious that what you want to do is return that value. So we can get rid of that. And it also says, well, actually, you've only got one statement in there, so you don't need the curly braces either. Okay, so this is the simplest version of a lambda that you can get. We'll see more complicated ones later, but for simple ones, you pass in some parameters or maybe no parameters, and then you give it a line of code which will return you some value, or maybe not even return you some value. It might just execute and do something. Okay? Does that answer the question of what is a lambda, more or less? We're going to spend most of today looking at lambdas. So we will see more and more different examples, and we'll see how to build our own functional interfaces and how to build our own lambdas. But for this example, all that's really important is that what I can do with something like this is, instead of having to implement everything that's inside stub service in my user service, I can have all my infrastructure in the stub service and just say, but this is the business logic. I mean, it's fairly minimal business logic because all we're doing is picking a random Twitter handle, but this is the business logic, and you pass that in as a tiny lambda. Okay? I'm mostly going to write these lambdas as anonymous inner classes and then collapse them back into lambdas. I just find it a bit easier to reason about the inputs and the outputs by doing stuff that way.